You're looking good, and it feels good to be with you today. Hello, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, author of this book, Consider My Servant Job. It's about the book of Job in the Old Testament and the atonement, great for Easter or whatever holiday is coming up. And this is Come Follow Me, Get to the Point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we never take roll, and I always get to the point. Today's theme is wine, keys, and false revelations. Sounds like some sort of latest Hollywood Weekend at Bernie's type movie, but no, this is actually a doctrine of Christ here. So, point one, section 27. 4 months after the church was organized, they needed wine for the sacrament. And you remember back then, up until I think about World War I, they'd use a communal chalice, a little phone stuff right here, and they're using wine, which was the common practice of Christendom at the time. And the angel says, no, you don't. You can use water. That says, doesn't matter what you use for the sacrament. Just do it with a focus on Christ. So here's a question. There's a humorist during the pandemic. He posted on social media, said, you remember how we're doing sacrament at home? And he said, well, we're going back to church now. No, I can no longer use Pepsi and Oreo cookies for the sacrament. So that's funny. Oreos and Pepsi as a sacrament. We get the humor. We appreciate where it's coming from. It does illustrate a point. But if you're looking at junk food, no. Which reminds me of this another issue. I was serving at a branch in the city called Evora, Évora, Portugal, famous for the ossuary there and also the Temple of Diana. So one day our district leader, who has also happened to be the branch president, forgot to bring bread. I happen to have a roll of Maria cookies. So if you served your mission outside the United States or you're traveling, you know what I'm talking about with Maria cookies. I had half a roll there. I said, okay, we can use these. And he said, no, we need to get bread. And so we went out and made a purchase on Sunday, and it was completely unnecessary. And this is a case where you don't defer to the leadership that did something wrong. It just doesn't matter what you take. You do it with the intent. No transubstantiation, no real presence here. It's just a symbol like oil or a temple garment. It said use wine of your own making. The issue is adulteration and intoxication. Other people can mix weird stuff in it, poison it. Remember the Book of Mormon where they poisoned the wine? So this raises a question. Changes in ordinances. Wine to water, a little bit the backwards miracle that Christ did. We use water from the chalice to use cups, and that helps with influenza, and I'm sure glad they did that. I never had to do that. Also with changes in the temple ordinances. I think President Nelson, one source I read, President Nelson has updated the endowment ceremony 4 times. And you understand with COVID-19, there's some necessary changes, and I endorse all of those. I work at a hospital. This is what spreads diseases. The number one spreader of diseases. Talk to the hand. That's why the hospitals have all these constantly sanitizing your hands, because your hands are what spreads the disease. You pick up something. Oh, look, here's a candy bar. Let's put it in our mouth. Hands, stop. Yeah, and how we're using the contact in the temple, minimizing that as much as possible. Stop spreads disease with the older people. But question, isn't this a problem when you change ordinances around? Isn't that what happened during the Great Apostasy? Catholic Church, the priest would drink the wine, but the body during Mass, they'd get the wafer. And that was an issue that Martin Luther had with the Catholic Church. Chapter 8 of the Joseph Smith Manual. God set the ordinances to be the same forever and ever, and set Adam to watch over them, to reveal them from heaven to man, or to send angels to reveal them, which happened in this section. An angel was revealed for the ordinances. Chapter 36, ordinances instituted in the heavens before the foundation of the world in the priesthood for the salvation of men are not to be altered or changed. All must be saved on the same principle. Have you lost your testimony yet, or what's going on? We have another principle. It's an article of faith. We believe that God has revealed, that He does now reveal, and He will reveal many great things. And anytime you're shutting off continuing revelation, that's a problem. And the continuing revelation would also apply to the ordinances. It's the issue of authorized change versus unauthorized change. And that's what was going on during the Great Apostasy, these unauthorized changes. Teaching of the Prophet Joseph Smith, page 237, the endowment. The endowment is always governed by the principle of revelation, how you administer it, how you tweak it, Right now, there are no longer any temples that perform the endowment ceremony live. Now, I was endowed in the Salt Lake City Temple, which was a live endowment. I'm kind of glad I got it that way. I like that's more of the old school high mass approaching. I'm grateful for that experience. I'm a bit sad that people won't do it. I used to go to Salt Lake City Temple or the Manti Temple just to get the live endowment thing here and there, just to kind of perk me up, break out of the rut of watching the same film. But yeah, this is just follow the prophet on this one. Comment. Sacrament. This is not really an issue for us because of this revelation, but it's an issue for other faiths. Transubstantiation, real presence. Like I said, Martin Luther. This is one of the issues that he had is Christ gave the bread and wine to all the disciples, and that was the early practice. But the Catholic Church, the priest would drink the wine, and then the body. You can still watch this on YouTube, and I've seen enough masses that that's what goes on there, and that's an issue. You're not getting the full sacrament. It gets kind of an interesting issue. So, Summa Theologica is written by Thomas Aquinas. And he's a great Catholic thinker there, angelic doctor. So he's a go-to source if you want to know what Catholic Church believes, especially medieval Catholic theology, which if you're interested, now I am, I have a degree in history. That stuff interests me. In fact, I just bought a book of selection of St. Augustine's writings. We're at 6 minutes. I don't want to get off on a tangent there, but one of the questions he asked in Summa Theologica is, what happens if a spider or a fly falls into the chalice? You have this consecrated thing, and well, like with us, if the oil gets messy or spilled, we just wipe it up. If you have that little vial of consecrated oil, mess up, gets rancid, you wash it out, and there's no transubstantiation. It's just a symbol. So, yeah, we won't get bent out of shape, and it's actually more of a common sense one if you agree with that. I read it's one of the commentaries I read. I think this is the Hiram Smith Doctrine and Covenants commentary. Some used water hydroperistate, or the aquarii, is I think how you'd say that. It's interesting. Groups, Jews, they allow grape juice to be used during Passover. Dennis Prager in his Passover uses that. And so it's not just peculiar to us. Other denominations do something similar, but that's not how we do things. We don't do a public opinion survey or anything that's inductive. We go to God for revelation. Point 2. This is the first part of this section deals with sacrament and how it's administered and how you change ordinances. And yeah, ordinances can change again, but just make sure it's coming from the first presidency. This talks about the sacrament meeting, but then there's a prophecy about a sacrament meeting in the future. You have Christ was involved with sacrament meetings, of course, one at the Last Supper, but there's also a future sacrament meeting at Adam on Diamond. And we're going to talk a little bit about that when we talk with section 116. Way to Perfection by President Joseph Fielding Smith, chapter 40, talks about that. Now, just a note, A Way to Perfection was written before Official Declaration 2, the Revelation of the Priesthood. So he teaches some things that were actually speculative. But it's important to read them just so you know the context of what's going on. It wasn't just Bruce R. McConkie. He's just a lightning rod. David O. McKay and Marky Peterson and Joseph Fielding Smith taught these things about race and the priesthood. So I will just repeat what the first presidency said on the issue. But later on in this section, it does something different. It talks about the sacrament meeting at Adam on Diamond, but it talks about keys and dispensation. Now, Moroni holds the keys of the record of the stick of Ephraim. Did you think about that? When we talk about keys, okay, you're the bishop, you're the elders quorum president, you have the keys of the sealing power, you have the keys of the king or the prophet. Priesthood keys associated with the Book of Mormon. We don't have a record of priesthood keys associated with the Bible or the Doctrine and Covenants. Well, I guess keys of the kingdom would count, but there's a specific set of priesthood keys that govern the Book of Mormon. Keys are the record of the stick of Ephraim that Moroni had. Think about that. You have Elias, and this Elias happens to be Noah. The Elias, the restoration, the forerunner, how Noah restored the world after the flood. But you have the Elias forerunners, John the Baptist, and the Aaronic priesthood. And that's another Elias, John the Baptist. You have Elijah, Joseph of Egypt, Jacob, Isaac, Abraham, and remember the Gospel of Abraham in the Kirtland Temple with another Elias there, Peter, James, and John, Mount of Transfiguration. And this highlights the need for an organized religion and one true church. So in the church, we've been hearing talks about using the correct name of the church and the need for organized religion, but we're missing something: one true church. If you have one true, this is the ring finger. This is an appropriate. This is a family friendly podcast. If you have one true church, then your church is going to have a correct name, and you're going to have the need for organized religion and priesthood keys. Temple work also are in the mix. So if you talk about the need for one true church, all these things fall into place. And so right now we're talking around this issue of one true church, and it's not working out well. But if you start with that premise, which is taught in the Book of Mormon, there's only two churches, then you understand the needs for keys and need for organization. You need for the sacrament meeting to have order in this. It's just not how you feel. And this talks about the fullness of time. Joseph Smith is described as leading the seventh dispensation. That was in this book called The Words of Joseph Smith, page 370. And the sermon is on the 12th of May, 1844, which you can track that down on the Joseph Smith papers. Yeah, we're in the end game right now. It's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The prophet just spoke about the last days. That's that unusual part of our name, latter days. It gets translated as last days in Portuguese and in French. I think in German too. Because it's a bit of an awkward expression. It's not kind of like the really proximate stuff. It's sort of a little bit broader. Okay, here's the stuff that leads up to it, the latter days, and you have the last days. As someone who's a native English speaker, that's how I'd understand the difference. But the best we can approximate it is with latter days. Makes it sound like a doomsday cult. But we are the voice of warning before the second coming. This concludes with talking about the armor of God. Now, I covered that in Ephesians, so you can go back, track down that video I did earlier, just not make this repetitive. I am winding this down. This is the fourth book. I've been doing this for 4 years now, and it's not good for me to repeat stuff or wait about a decade or maybe 20 years and then go back and cover this again, just so I can make this fresh and different. So point 3 is we're dealing with that was section 27. This is section 28. This one talks about Hiram Page. Now, Hiram Page is one of the 8 witnesses and found a funny-looking rock, and he started getting revelations from it. There's another sister, her last name was Hubble. We don't know her first name, and she also got revelations. And son of a gun, Oliver Cowdery got taken in by Hiram Page. And so this is a revelation that Joseph Smith got to correct it. And so Joseph Smith said, okay, yeah, this explained the order of revelation. Yeah, everyone gets personal revelation. Only one person gets revelation for the church. This is a little bit different in some of the more of the charismatic evangelical churches, Protestant churches that are more charismatic. People will say, I have a word for you. People getting personal revelation for people whom they don't have, or getting revelation for people they don't have stewardship over. So you understand the principle. I get revelation for myself. I can get revelation for my ministering families. I get revelation for my calling. I get revelation for my career. I don't get revelation for the ward. I'm not the bishop. Hi, Tyson. Let's see. So what happened is, it's interesting. This is a bit of a public issue, but Joseph Smith got a revelation. He needed to correct it. So Oliver Cowdery was tasked or was assigned or delegated the task to talk with Hiram Page alone and to correct things. Elder D. Todd Christofferson spoke about the need for correction and chastening, and that's an interesting talk to reread. And Hiram Page made the correction. See, you can fall down. The question is, if you fall down, are you getting up or are you just laying in the mud? Some people just lay in the mud and make up excuses. Hiram Page admitted his mistakes, and that's a good example for everyone. So what is the fate of the stone? One source I read said it was ground up. The other source I read that was in the possession community of Christ. I don't know about that. I know that we have the chocolate egg-shaped one that B.H. Roberts and Wilford Woodruff talked about. It's in our possession. I think it was supposed to be on display. You see pictures of it in the Joseph Smith papers of the seer stone that Joseph Smith used. Now, this raises a question about false revelation and people who get revelation are out of order. The elder gets a revelation that a woman's supposed to marry him, or the sister gets a revelation that she's from the tribe of Cupid, and I'll stop there. Book of Mormon, Words of Mormon, verses 15 and 16. And it came to pass that after there had been false Christ, and their mouths has been shut, and they punished according to their crimes, there had been false prophets and false preachers and teachers among the people, and all these they're punished according to their crimes. Now, pay attention to this. This is not just a person going off their tangent. A false Christ. We actually have people who think they're Christ. David Koresh is one. Those of us who are older remember the Heaven's Gate cult at the dawn of the internet age. I went there numerous times to their website. There are false Christ. And so Elder McConkie said this: the term false Christ refers to false ideas about Christ or false representation, like say one you get from the Trinity, or these different even heresies among Christians about that Docetism. But it says here their mouths had been shut, and this is not talking about person that'd be a false prophet. A false Christ is actually someone who thinks they're Christ, and that was a problem among the Nephites. It said their mouths had been shut, so I'd assume this is actually a person, something like Korihor or Nehor. So you have false people who think they're Christ, and false sabbatizers among the Jews, false prophets, false preachers, and teachers among them. But there's interesting, it's connected, punished according to their crimes. Now you think of Nehor, how Nehor killed Gideon. I'm Nehor. God loves everyone, and everyone will be saved because God doesn't make junk. But he kills Gideon. Pay attention. There's a little bit more going on here. This is some hard cheese to swallow for people who are agnostic egalitarianisms. There's crimes associated with these false prophets. When some of the atheists criticize religion for being a scam, there's some truth to that. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now later on in the section, Hiram Page is told, "Thou shalt not command him who is at thy head and at the head of the church." Now that's the Huffy sister talking over the bishop. Relief Society president wanting to suck up all the ward budgets so they can have good centerpieces. 1 Timothy 5:1, "Rebuke not an elder, and treat him as a father." We had a sister missionary in my mission who would call always referred to the 19-year-old boys, and she screamed at me because she can't get a key to the bishoprics office. Now, there's a tension here. I talked about this earlier, section 6, verse 19, how Oliver Cowdery was told to admonish Joseph Smith in his faults and be admonished in his faults. So read this: "Thou shalt not command him as at the head, but admonish him in their faults." And there's a context with a counselor. That's a different context versus a general member. But also, there's a right way to give feedback and a wrong way. Now, I've had numerous issues with some leaders who just did not see things differently. And sometimes I had to escalate it up to the stake presidency. And it wasn't a pleasant experience because of this. It also, too, since I was 28 years an elder. So as an elder at this time, we're having to say, okay, this bishop's not handling church finances properly. I had to take it up to the stake president. There's a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this. Posting stuff on social media, that's not the right way to do this. Also, there's an issue about revelation, personal revelation, and larger revelation. President Oaks, back in October 2010, gave a talk called Two Lines of Communication. So there's a general revelation, but revelation to families. In our day, we have false prophets. We have the polygamy cults here in Utah. What about the social media influencers, the pundits, the podcasters, people like what I'm doing who get on there and criticize the church? Now, I don't criticize the church. That's other people, John Dehlin and Jana Reese and Alyssa Grenfell and Nemo the Mormon can do that. I will say I don't understand something. Can I get more information and clarification? And I've said this a couple of times on some of these other podcasts and also with my news one. That's an effective way to resolve a conflict. President N. Eldon Tanner, he was a counselor in the first presidency. He was also from Canada. So yeah, during my lifetime, we had a Canadian council. It's not all a bunch of blue-eyed Americans running the church, but I had people from Canada and Germany in my lifetime, and we've crossed this hurdle, but people act like we haven't, which is kind of funny. They're just not really up to speed on history. But what N. Eldon Tanner said, we can become false prophets to ourselves. And this is what President Benson quoted in his 14 Fundamentals talk. N. Eldon Tanner, false prophets to ourselves. Stop and think about this. Becoming a false prophet to yourself. Well, we're at 20 minutes. Let's get to the Christ quotient. So let's first talk about the atonement quotient. As President Elton said, spend some time every week studying the atonement. So here's a lesson on the atonement with Hiram Page. You can get false revelations. You can deceive the church. You can deceive top church leaders. And you can still be forgiven. Yeah, you can deceive a member of the first presidency with a false revelation and still be forgiven of that. And just chew on that for a little bit. Priesthood keys and atonement. The atonement is not a free-floating power. It's not how Protestants understand grace. It's not magic like in Harry Potter or in other fantasy novels. It's not allomancy. I have read 2 of Brandon Sanderson's books, so I'm not criticizing reading that. I'm just saying interpreting the gospel in terms of Doctor Strange or Harry Potter or Gandalf, that's problematic. It's not the Force. That's we're talking about really different things. That may actually be helpful to you, is get a list. Okay, how is the gospel and how is the atonement different from how we're seeing in our entertainment media? You do need order. There's confusion in the Protestant world and also the Islamic world because there's no central authority. At least with the Catholic Church, you have a pope and you have a person who could put their foot down and said, okay, this is wrong. Let's take care of this problem. But with Protestantism, Judaism, and Islam, it's just decentralized. Same thing with the Eastern Orthodox Church. There's just no one central authority. You see, there's some advantages to that, but there's also disadvantages of that. Sometimes you get personalities and willpower. Look up Ravi Zacharias and James MacDonald. These were 2 Protestant parachurch people. As an avid follower of Ravi Zacharias, I used to get his books as Christmas presents. I'd follow James MacDonald because I like what they had to say, but these 2 men fell from grace. Ravi Zacharias, he's a good liaison we had with the evangelical world, but he was seducing woman, and James MacDonald just went bonkers. Having a central authority does that. It limits that. As Section 88 says, none are exempt from the, Section 84, I think it is, none are exempt from the justice of God, including the president of the church. There's a mechanism for excommunicating the president of the church in the Revelations, and we'll get to that. Christ in the sacrament. This should not be an issue, but it is. In the early 2000s, there's this trope, and I heard this thing twice, maybe 3 times in sacrament meeting, and one from my stake president. And that if Christ was here, he wouldn't be in a church meeting. He'd be out helping the poor. Like I said, I heard my stake president say that. After he said that, he sat down and he sat through the remainder of the sacrament meeting. He wasn't practicing what he was preaching, because if he really believed it, he would have got to said that and just bolted out the door and run down to the soup kitchen. Elder Neal A. Maxwell said this. This is from the Neal A. Maxwell quote book. He talked about, quote, hypertensive activist teachers who do not understand the role of contemplation, reflection, and worship, and who would empty the classrooms of the church and have us all march off heedlessly to become involved. You're abandoning a covenant in favor of secular socialist activism. You do things in wisdom and order. Blocking off 2 hours is not going to damage anyone, and it's a personal renewal. Habit 7, sharpen the saw. That's what sacrament meeting is, habit 7, making that covenant. You'll be more effective servant once you make that covenant. It's not about putting food in your mouth, hitting church like it's a drive-through restaurant. 1 cup of sacramental water, 1 fragment of bread, and supersize those fries. That's not a drive-through. We're here to make a covenant. Showing up to, when you say go to church, that doesn't mean show up there and meander around the hallways for 2 hours. It means actively worshiping. So, do things right and let's get our heads straight and twisted the right direction. Sacrament dilemma. We do it, there's a saying, familiarity breeds contempt. We're not taking it seriously. It's casuals, like munchies at a Super Bowl party. That's one of the dilemmas. The other dilemma is we take it too seriously and make this over complex. Make sure we think there's this complex thing called preparing to the sacrament. It's very ill-defined, but it's critically important. And if we don't do this, something's wrong. Read the scriptures. What does the scriptures say about preparing for the sacrament? Now, it says, take no, Oliver Crowdery was rebuked for saying he took no thought save it were to ask, and we can say the same thing. We took no thought save it were to eat. But on the other hand, it's not a complex process that's ill-defined, and you just can't find a solid answer within your anxiety. Just get revelation on it, study the scriptures. So that's it. We're at 25 minutes. A sneak preview. There's a principle I've talked about called agree and ask. And this helps us understand why ward councils go wrong when we talk about the principle of agreeing and asking. So that's your sneak preview, or that's our hook for the next podcast. So just in conclusion, just like to repeat my first point, we need to understand the infinite and eternal power of Christ's atonement. You can deceive church members and a member of the First Presidency and be a conduit for false revelations and still be forgiven. So that happens when you turn to Christ. And Christ, that's the point.